Okay, so this is week two of this sort of open-ended, no particular time frame discussion on totalitarianism. And prior to recording, we've actually been talking about the need to gain more clarity and perhaps even redefine what we mean by totalitarianism, and is it a good thing or a bad thing, and so on. And that's something we will get into down the road, and that some of these sessions seeks to explore anyway. As we said last week, what we're going to spend, the focus or the theme of today's session is the tools and methods by which totalitarianism exerts itself in the world, and whether we can see any of those things at play in the world today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to hog the floor for 3 or 4 minutes at the start, because I've prepared just a frame to offer, right? I'm not saying that this is the frame that we must have, but I'm offering a frame which you can pick up and use if you want to, or reject it and come up with your own one if you wish to, right? I offer it entirely in an open spirit, but I'm not attached to it in any way. So let me screen share. So yeah, this is the basic idea. This is the basic frame. The idea here is that, oh, let me make this a proper slideshow so you can see it better. Yeah, this idea of emergency, using emergencies to exert more and more control, is a recurring theme, and that tyranny or totalitarianism, or whatever we want to call it, always disguises itself as being for the public good, right? And comes in through the back door in that respect. And so this is something you might all want to give a little bit of thought to when we go to breakout rooms. It might be a good way to kick off the discussion, right? What are your top 5 red flags on the road towards totalitarianism? This is mine. And so, I mean, you can read them for yourself. I won't read them out to you. I'll just shut up for a minute and let you read them for yourself. And they kind of all connect with each other, really. I mean, it's one single multi-tentacled monster, isn't it? The totalitarian advance. So yeah, that's my top 5. As I say, maybe give some thought to your top 3, top 5, whatever. It doesn't have to be 5, but yeah, that might be a good way to kick off the breakout room discussions. And I just want to finish off. I'm not going to talk for very long. I just want to finish off. I came across something recently. It's a report written by a guy called Luke Kemp at the University of Cambridge. He works in their study for their Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. And here are a few stats from that report. That during COVID, 32 countries have resorted to the use of military to enforce the rules that the governments have imposed. 22 have used surveillance drones and in conjunction with expanded facial recognition software. 28 have widely suppressed the internet. 13 have shut it down at some point. This is the one that freaks me out possibly the most. Is 180 track and trace apps are in use across 109 states and countries in the world. 124 countries around the world declared states of emergency. And I put a little note in here about the Third Reich, because he mentions this in the report. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of days ago about, using Nazi Germany as an example to compare our current situation to, that it seems hyperbolic and ridiculous, and that there's this axiom in debating and argumentation that as soon as you invoke Hitler, you've lost the argument, right? And so I don't know how you guys feel about that, but anyway, whatever. The Third Reich developed from a state of emergency declared in 1933, which never, ever went away, right? That state of emergency persisted right through until 1945. 87% of the world's population, this is according to the author's definition of repressed, closed and obstructed, but according to him, 87% of the world's population now live in countries which are at least one of those 3 things. And in the US, there are currently 32 active emergencies going on right now, the oldest of which is 39 years old. I mean, the Patriot Act is 20 years old now, right? It was supposed to be an emergency act, temporary, to be revoked at some point. But this is the thing, this kind of legislation never, ever gets revoked. So whoever it was last week made the point about, well, COVID is nothing new, right? It's been going on for a long time. Yes, absolutely. COVID has just accelerated it. So, yeah, I just put that out there as a little kickoff and to offer a frame in which to have the discussion. I propose that we spend most of today's session in breakout rooms and then come back together for a group discussion. But I would also like to propose that in the breakout rooms, we spend the last 5 minutes or so of the breakout room agreeing on a synopsis of what we've been talking about. And then when we come back to the main room, we can give that synopsis to the room, right? And so we actually do a prepared synopsis rather than being put on the spot. What came up in your room that you'd like to share? And you can never remember it all, right? Being aware that that will be required at the end of the session, right? And I'll put out a 5-minute warning, start preparing your synopsis. And then when we come back, we can hopefully be succinct, right? Not waffle on, not repeat ourselves, and give a really good, clear synopsis of what we discussed in our breakout rooms. Does that sound good and fair and reasonable? The next choice is, do we want to do a 3 and a 4 or 2 2s and a 3? I think a 3 and a 4 feels right to me, but if anyone feels strongly the other way, I'm happy to listen. Okay, so let me prepare a room. Does anyone want to say anything, by the way, in response to what I've said, or their own top 5 or whatever? I mean, I'm very happy to give a few minutes to anyone that wants to say anything before we go off into breakout rooms.
Eric, I wonder if you could just put your list of 5 items, elements of totalitarianism on. Can you share your screen again?
Sure, no problem. Huh. Strange. Won't let me make it bigger. Won't let me do anything to it. Try again. There we go.
Thanks.
Okay, so if no one's got anything, then I'll create the room.
Jamin's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Jamie. I do apologise, chap. I didn't see you. Go ahead.
No, no worries, no worries. So first of all, I'm totally cool with the scope. Since this is an ongoing series, I just wanted to put on the table kind of a little bit of an expanded definition of totalitarianism, which is just emergent in my mind from these conversations, which is the inherent totalitarianism, the invisible totalitarianism inherent in our current mode of production, right? Of unbounded hoarding centered around the individual, separation, individualism, etc. That's creating this invisible totalitarianism. Anyway, I just wanted to at least put it on the table. Not that we have to talk about it today or anything of the sort, but just wanted to put it on the table. Thank you.
No, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. We tend to think of it in a binary sense, right? Is or is not totalitarianism, but it is a whole continuum of different elements. Yeah, no, good point.
I especially last week, I just wanted to share this. Jamin's expression of the significance of ownership, which seems maybe a little different than a variation of what he just expressed, because I totally agree that the really tricky part of totalitarianism is how subtle it can be. That mass populations can basically be significantly impacted and have little or no conscious awareness that they're being impacted. And I think that ties to that aspect of ownership, that it's the illusion. It's mass populations being subjected to illusion, and that to really have a really astute appreciation for how totalitarianism functions and works. That's certainly part of it. So thanks for sharing that, Jamin. I appreciate it.
Indeed. All right, let's. If you don't get an invitation to join a room, it means you're staying here. Enjoy, and I'll give it about half an hour, maybe something like that, in breakout rooms, and I'll give you a 5-minute warning. Then we'll come back here. We'll share for 10 or 15 minutes, have a little break, and then come back and do it all again. All right, enjoy. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope that was enjoyable and insightful. Would someone like to offer a synopsis of what came up? We'll just do, say, 3-4 minutes of synopsis each kind of thing, and then have a little chat plus break. So go ahead, anyone that wants to. Or I can start by doing the synopsis of Art Room if nobody wants to. All right, why don't I do that then? I mean, I've actually made some notes. We did do this at the end, and I think I have a reasonably comprehensive set of notes. So in no particular order, this may not flow particularly well because it's just quick notes, but one of the things that came up, Walter and I started getting into a fairly heated debate about COVID numbers, right? And it became apparent that we're using very different numbers, right? And we both believe that we're using good, solid government type data, and yet we disagree completely on the data. And so the inability to agree on facts, simple data and facts, we can't even agree on that, let alone how to interpret them best, right? And that this leads to a high level of confusion in the population. And that confusion is one of many tools that can be used to pit us against each other. One of the other things that came up was this notion of righteousness, right? When people are frightened or nervous or anxious, whatever, righteousness feels like a really solid place to be, right? It's very, very, very appealing to engage with righteousness and point the finger at people. And so those who would seek to create totalitarian conditions would do exactly that. They would hack people's sense of righteousness and get them pointing the finger at each other. And the example of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated came up, where the vaccinated pointed at the unvaccinated going, "You are selfish, you're endangering us all, you're putting my children at risk," kind of thing. And the unvaccinated pointing at the vaccinated going, "You're a bunch of dirty shedders, you're idiots, you're sheep, you're all going to die, none of you will be able to have children, what is wrong with you," right? And so there is and both are absolutely certain that the other is evil and that they are standing on righteous ground. What else? Yeah, that everything, this feeds into what we were talking about at the very start before we went into breakout rooms, that totalitarianism, structural totalitarianism, if you like, is everywhere. We have no choice but to go to their schools and learn what they want us to learn and do their jobs and spend their money and pay their taxes and so on and so on and so on, right? And so we are already, in a sense, in a totalitarian environment. And yeah, the last thing is authoritarianism versus totalitarianism, which is something we touched on last week. But that authoritarian regimes are easy to point at, right? You know who's in charge. It's the king, it's the emperor, it's the cabinet, whatever it is, right? You can point to the people, but modern totalitarianism is not like that. We don't actually know who really wields the power, right? It's invisible, it's murky. We can't easily identify those individuals or those groups. We sort of have a general sense that it's big tech or whatever. What the fuck does that even mean, right? There's nothing to attack, which is what's so grey and scary about it. Right, okay, that's it. Sorry if that went on a bit too long.
No, good stuff, Eric. So I'll offer a little mini synopsis from the breakout room. Simon, Brian, Tony, and I. We started talking about kind of the sort of foundational layers undergirding totalitarianism, all the way down to the level of epistemology, ontology, and the question, who am I? Starting at the level of the individual, who am I? Why am I here? And extending to the collective at whatever Russian doll level of collective, who are we and why are we here? And we came upon an interesting thought, which is that whether the suppression of those fundamental questions, who are we, why are we here, whether self-imposed culturally, for example, or through religion or whatever, as if to say, hey, Jesus has the answers, boy, and they're right here in the good book. So don't you go asking those dumb questions because we got the answers. All right, that's a form of totalitarianism. So the suppression of this whether by individual, group, religion, culture, or whatever, is kind of a fundamental root of totalitarianism. The opposite of totalitarianism is a constant exploration in that realm, which kind of, throws all the checker pieces up in the air every time you go there, in a sense, because there's a new answer to that question depending upon, the present circumstances of the world and how we relate to those, etc. So above the epistemology, ontology level, fundamentally there's freedom of thought, freedom of choice. What does that look like? What does that really mean? Et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so we just kind of had an expansive, largely philosophical conversation. With that, I pass the feather. Thank you. And great to see you all here.
What's the procedure for jumping in that we're using to say something?
Just jump in, mate. If people clash, then one backs off, right? But yeah, just jump in when you want to, or put up a hand, and you'll be got to next, as you wish.
Okay. Let me throw something in here about. I 100% agree that we are in the United States and elsewhere. There's this great division of the population. Essentially, in the United States, crudely, generally, you have what was the Trump side of the country, and then the kind of blue progressive side. Very crude, very general. Each side now believes certain things to be true, and they are very, very different ideas about what's going on. And what I'd like to throw in here is when I used to work in mental health before I retired, we always understood on a clinical level that people who are delusional, they might get a diagnosis of delusional disorder, something in the schizophrenia spectrum, but in the clinical mental health world, psychiatry, psychology, etc., it was always kind of known you just can't get people to drop their delusions. We need to medicate them. Now, the purpose of the medication, and usually it would be very powerful antipsychotic medication that would fundamentally repress a person's emotionality. And that means that they would still have their delusions. They would still, they didn't give them up, but they were no longer emotionally charged to do something about their delusions. And the only way, and I used to do this with some of my clients, and a few of them, they were able to grasp it. But the thing is, in order to get rid of a delusion or any belief, any belief that you don't think is a delusion, what you have to do is you have to force yourself to look at the information, the evidence that contradicts, that contravenes your belief. You have to do that, or you really have no chance of unloading it. Then you need to understand that we're hardwired, programmed. Once we have a belief, if we get something thrown at us that contravenes the belief, we will reflexively, instinctively rationalize or minimize it away. And if I'll do this very, very quickly, but just to give a mental health, I always used to use it in my presentations. So if I have somebody who is, I'm pretty sure they're delusional. They believe that their family is poisoning their food. And I know the family. I know there's a lot of problems with the family, but I really doubt seriously that the food is being poisoned. So I can say to that person, let's get 12 samples of the food that you believe is poison. We're going to take it to a laboratory. Let's have it checked. So
Dan,
I go ahead.
Sorry, do you mind if I just butt in here? Because I actually think you've made your point about the removing the emotional charge from the delusion before you can. And in order to do that, you need to confront yourself with the opposite view and, you know, get past the emotional charge that generates, right? I think you've actually made the point. And I'd like to take a break for a few minutes before we come back and continue, if that's all right. Give people a chance to make a cup of tea and have a wee. Sorry, you've got one. Sorry, you still want to? Go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing I'll just add on to this is this. So yes, you have to force yourself to look at the information, the evidence that goes against your belief. But you also need to understand that you are hardwired, programmed to rationalize and minimize it away. Like in that example, if I show the woman the 12 samples, she'll say, well, that's not enough. It's only 12. Or usually what'll happen in these kind of situations for real is the person will then accuse me and the laboratory of being in cahoots with the family. You know, will become a paranoid rationalization. Now, so we need to know that on some level, this is what we're up against when we have large groups of people who are completely programmed one way and another group the other way. Thank you. I just wanted to add that.
I'm going to have to head off very shortly, everyone. So I'm going to pass over to Jamin, the hosting of this, because it's his room after all. Thank you all very much for coming. Again, I've really enjoyed this. Jamin, can you take over the recording as well? If I stop recording, can you take over and just do the last little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Let me just turn on a separate computer for that, and that'll be on in less than a minute. Just bear with me.
No worries. No, I've got a few minutes.
Eric, just before, while he's doing that, before putting this up on YouTube, I suggest doing a preamble of like, this is not medical advice. No one's talking about their expertise. That this is just a conversation we're trying to have. Like, just do the, not medical advice, so that they might still, but can't come in and be like taken down for bad medical advice.
Yeah, something similar came up in our room as well. Yeah.
Recording.